Ooh, wait, I'm not moving. Oops. I'm frozen. 1 second. There we go. Slight little mishap there. Alright. Good afternoon, everybody, or good evening, depending on where you are in the world. Let's move on to our next lesson today. Last week was a bit of a mixed review. We talked about some new particles, we talked about some new sentence enders, and we talked a little bit about numbers. It wasn't a very comprehensive lesson. It was a lot of little miscellaneous things. But today we're going to move on to something new. Up until now, we haven't really talked about verb usage yet. A lot of the sentences that we've talked about usually have to do with, say, like, we've written out stuff like Watashi wa, let's say, gakusei. We've crafted simple sentences like this. Things like Watashi wa gakusei desu. Or, let's read this out. Wa gakusei desu. Which the sentence just says, I am a student. A very simple sentence. Technically the verb in English would be am. It's a state of being. Counts as a verb. But in Japanese, that's really the only kind of... We haven't talked about how to do any sort of actions or anything. We've just talked about existence. Just that you're there and that you are something. And today's lesson is going to focus quite a bit on how we actually can talk about action. In English, it's actually a little bit weird. When we talk about wa as a particle... Good evening, Reina. And say... Gekigen-yo... Bokigen-yo... Oh. Good afternoon, good day to you too. So wa is like am, is, are. These kinds of state of being words. The funny thing about that is that in English, when we think about verbs, when we think about, like, let's say run, right? We say things like I run, you run, they run, and so on. We don't have to conjugate it any differently. For this, for present tense, we just have running. We have run. We say in the past tense, we say I ran or you ran. And we have things like saying like I am running. You are running, and so on. This is how we work with verbs in English, or we have the past tense too. And there's a lot of different ways that we work with verbs. Japanese has its own set of rules for how we work with verbs, and we're going to talk today about the present tense. We're going to talk about when you are doing things currently. So let's talk about that. Say verbs in Japanese. And today we're just going to focus on the following. So to start this off, we have to know that there are two different kinds of verbs in this language, and the kind of verb that we're working with determines how we sort of modify them or conjugate them. So in English, we have, like the example I used earlier, I ran, I am running, I run. It's pretty consistent across the board for different verbs. I sleep, I'm sleeping, I slept. And the way we do like past tense kind of changes sometimes to be the order of the letters. And that kind of trend also carries over through Japanese. There's two main kinds of verbs that we look at here, and I'm going to show you some examples of both of these, just so you can sort of see the pattern here. So we're going to talk about, we call these Miru verbs, or they're also called ichidan, or also vowel stem verbs. And we're also going to talk about verbs. And I'm going to get into more detail on this. I just want to show examples of what we're going to be looking at here. They're called godan verbs, or sometimes also called consonant stems. And the reason for this will be made clear as I go through these examples. So every verb, just like what I did in English, like the example with running, run is the base word for that verb. Sleep is the base word for any verb modified to talk about sleeping. So let's do this. We're going to talk about our base form first. We're going to talk about the verb tabe. Actually, let me write this here. This is going to be, tabe, or to eat. The verb for eating. The first form that we talk about here, this is sort of the general form. Whenever you look this up in a dictionary, whenever you just think of the word as it is, without applying any sort of tense, like past or present, just the word itself. We call this the dictionary form. So tabe looks like this. We have the kanji here. It's the kanji for eating. It's also the kanji for food. Ta-be-bu. That's what we call the dictionary form. In order to say that you are eating, like I'm eating, you're eating, they're eating, we call this the present positive. And you'll see that it ends the sentence similarly to how we've been ending sentences earlier with that oo sound. So to say that I am eating, we would say Ta be ma su. Tabemasu. When we say the present negative, if we say I'm not eating or I won't eat, present negative. And as I go through both these columns, you'll see some similarities and some differences, and that'll show us like essentially the sort of rules that we have to follow when we're conjugating verbs. The present negative, again, ta. This is a symbol for eating. Tabemasen. So whenever we want to negate something, what we add to the end of the verb is this masen. When you end a sentence like that, you're saying that you're negating whatever sort of verb you're applying here. Tabemasu is to eat, tabemasen is not eating. And then we call this last part, we have the stems. Shining Sion, thank you for joining the classroom. We've just started. We're just introducing some conjugation of verbs, sort of laying down the base rules for these words here. And we say that the stem for to eat is just... I'll be consistent with writing these kanji, right? Tabe. And we call this the stem, because this is where we sort of derive the rest of our other words here. The dictionary form, the basic form of this word, like if you were to look it up in a dictionary, is taberu. If we say I'm eating, it would be tabemasu. If we say that I won't eat, or that I'm not eating, you say tabemasen. And tabe is the root word. Thinking like, you think about like the English word eat, right? You will say, I will eat. But when we say that we won't eat, we just say not eat. Here we say tabemasen. This masen essentially being that won't. Tabe is eating. Masen, when you add that to the end of a verb, means the opposite of it, that you're not going to eat. Mas means that you are affirming that you will eat. And you'll see that that is how these ru verbs work. Now, as I go through this next set of verbs, the u verbs, you'll see how there's going to be a slight difference in the vowel sounds you'll see here. So the base word that we're going to use here is ik, or to go. So the dictionary form of ik is iku. The present positive form, though, and this is where it gets a little different, is going to be ikimasu. Ikimasu. Sure, it's a pretty commonly heard word. Whenever you're ready to go, whenever you're ready to do something, ikimasu. And then the present negative would be ma den. Like saying that you won't go or asking someone to not go. Ikimasen. And our root word here is iki. So here it is. Ru verbs, if you note, for example here, taberu. Verbs that we call ru verbs or vowel stem verbs, we cut off this entire last vowel, or this last character here. The ru isn't a part of it. Taberu becomes tabemasu, tabemasen. The be part still stays the same. We don't change the vowel sound of that. Compare this to go, iku. Iku is what we call a godan verb, a u verb, a consonant stem verb. And when we say consonant stem, that means that the consonant will stay the same, but the vowel sound on that consonant attached to it will be different. Iku is our base word, but it turns into ikimasu, ikimasen. The ki, the ku turns to ki. And I'm gonna go through some examples of both the ru and u verbs so that you could see sort of how this pattern extends to multiple words, because it's hard to see a pattern with just one vocabulary term. So, let's do this. Let me make this on a new layer here. Let's cut this here. Okay. Let's cut that and paste it. That's on a new layer. So another example of a ru verb here. Let's go talk about the verb Miru. So Miru is to see. And we type this out as Miru. To do this in the present positive form, just like in the dictionary form of tabe, taberu, the ru gets dropped, and we end up doing mi ma su. Mimasu. Present negative, tabemasen, similarly would be mi ma sen. With the stem just being mi. So you can see here, just like in the first vocab word here, taberu, the ru gets cut off, and we have this. We keep that pronunciation of the characters before it. Miru is a different case because it's not followed by any other hiragana. So we have miru. The ru gets dropped when we conjugate it to the present positive. So if you say that you're looking something, you say mimasu. You say you can't see it, mimasen. And mi is that stem here. Let's look at one other example here, just so we can see another case. And then we'll talk about how the u verbs work. Let's just clear this out. And now another example is oki or to wake up. The dictionary form is, call this okiru. And to say that you are waking up, you would say, wait, what am I writing? I'm writing tabe. Oops, let me just erase that. And we would have oh wait, I forgot to actually finish writing this kanji. The O should look like this. Okimasu. Okimasu. And to say that you're not waking up, or I will not wake up, you would say, or say I am not waking up, essentially. Okimasen. So if you're just coming in, when we talk about verbs, right? When we talk about actions, we have what we call a dictionary form In this case, to eat is taberu. In this case here, to wake up is okiru. When we want to conjugate that, when we want to say that we are doing that action, we drop the ru, we drop this last character here, and we replace it with mas. To say, I am eating, you say tabemasu. If you wanted to talk about how you are waking up, you would say okimasu. And if you wanted to say that you're doing the opposite of that, if you're negating that statement, say that I am not eating, the word that you would use, the verb you would use would be tabemasen. If you are in bed and you're really comfy, I also forgot to draw this correctly. There we go. If you were laying in bed and you didn't want to get up, you would say okimasen. I am not getting up. And the stem again would be kind of like how tabe was the stem there. Our stem here is oki. This is sort of the base word that we use in order to sort of define that verb. So those are some examples of ru verbs. For ru verbs or vowel stem verbs, we cut off that last character and replace it with the mas. However, for u verbs, let's do this actually. Let me write this in a new layer. Erase this just so we have the space here. I just want to make this a little bit easier for myself here. Let's select all this. Let's cut and paste that. I missed a couple of things, but that's okay. All right, here we go. The u verbs. Let me just erase those leftovers there. U verbs, again, are a little different. Instead of dropping the last character like we did with the ru verbs, the way these verbs are conjugated are as follows. So another example of an u verb would be yomu, or just yo, or to read. And the dictionary form of this, the general form that we use to read is as follows. Yo looks like this. This is a symbol for reading. Yomu. Yomu. If you wanted to say that you are reading currently, you would say yo mi yomimasu. So that is to read, yomimasu. While the negative, if you're saying that you're not reading, that would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, would be yomi ma sen. And the stem is just yo. And this one takes a while to write. Yomi. That is our stem. So if you're saying that you are reading, you would say yomimasu. And if you say that you're not reading, yomimasen. And the dictionary form of that, yomu, you can see, just like in iku, we drop that last vowel. We keep the consonant the same. You could see, unlike with tabe, taberu, turning into tabemasu, here, that yom sound, that yom sound is there. It's just the vowel at the end gets changed. Sort of like, we call this the consonant stem because that consonant sound is still there. We don't change the whole thing. It's just yom, instead of yomu, it's yomi. Instead of iku, it's iki. So iku becomes ikimasu, yomu becomes yomimasu. And the rules for that change just usually based off what word you're working with. Typically the u sounds turn into I sounds, or e sounds, and that's just something really that as you learn more vocabulary and learn proper usage of words, as you study that kind of like vocabulary, you'll see the different examples of that. Let's go through one more example here. The next example that we're going to do, I just want to do one more example so we have an even number of both English, or of both, why did I say English? Of both ru verbs and u verbs in conjugation. Let me just delete this. And what we're going to talk about now, this last verb, is going to be, it's going to look similar to yomi, but it kind of has a similar idea behind it actually. The base is ana, or to speak. The dictionary form being, looks like this, hanashi. So hanashi is to speak. If we say that, if you're to say I am speaking, you would write out or oh, so, oops, it's not hanasu, it's, let me just erase this. Oops. I went too ahead of myself. The dictionary form, similar to how ik has iku as its consonant stem, or its dictionary form, hana is hanasu. And when we turn that into the present form, we would say hanashimasu. When we say present negative, when we say I'm not speaking, yeah, hanasu. My mistake. And then we have the present negative, hanashimasen. And our stem being hanashi. And that's to speak. You say I'm not speaking, or I will not speak, or I am not speaking to them, you would say hanashimasen. Masen being to negate, mas being to affirm. So those are our verbs, and there's also a set of verbs that are sort of a special case. They're a case that, in the case of the first one, is attached to a lot of like nouns to turn them into verbs, and the second one is just the verb to come. Let's go over those as well, just to see. The former is going to be one that you see very often. The latter is going to be, let me just do this actually. Let's take this into another layer. There's a lot of different forms we got to talk about here. So let's select all this. And let's select what we can. Wait, it's empty. There we go, just so that we have this for record keeping, just to look back at it. Alright. And these next verbs that we're going to look at are, let's see, let me get a new layer here. This layer seems like it hasn't been used yet. The first one is going to be Sudo, which is to do. And Sudo is what you attach to a lot of nouns to turn them into actions. And the way we do this, right? We have Sudo, obviously. That's our dictionary form. And then the present positive is she must. That you are doing this action. So when you say like benkyou shimasu, you say I am studying. That's what's actually in the thumbnail of this video. And you see a lot of people use that in their like Twitter bio saying that they're currently learning Japanese. Shimasu means that you are presently studying. While shimasen means that you are not doing an action. And the stem is just she. The other irregular verb that we have to focus on is kuru, or to come. And this is kuru. With the positive form being imasu. You can see that these are being treated like those vowel stems, or those consonant stems. That the first consonant stays the same. These both start with a K sound, but kuru turns into kimasu. Then obviously, to negate that, kimasen. These are just irregular case verbs. You're going to see Sudo a lot especially, so that's an important one to keep track of. So, just to cover those. For example, let me just write this out here. We could say... If I write this out, then... Wrong way. 2. I write out this kanji here. This is benkyou, or study. When I write benkyou suru, that turns it from just being study to study. When I have something like this, this is... Ooh. 1 second. This goes from being just love to love. Benkyou suru, ai suru. So adding that suru turns it into a verb. It turns it into an action as opposed to just a concept or an idea. So that's how we conjugate our verbs. And now we have to talk about using them in a sentence. And in order to use them in a sentence, we're going to have to learn a new particle. Ooh, didn't want to delete that. So in the past, why did it make copies of this? There we go. In the past, we've talked about... Actually, I'll talk about some sentence examples first, and then I'll explain the particles there. I think that's a better way to do this. So, verb usage, present tense. And we can use present tense verbs to obviously discuss actions that we're doing right now, but we can also use it. It's not necessarily just present tense. We use it to describe things that we do regularly, and we can also use it to describe things that we plan on doing. The present tense form is used in both of these cases as well. For example, let's write out this sentence here. For habitual actions, I wanted to write out the sentence, I often watch anime. That's our sentence, right? Maybe it's true for you, maybe it's not. You could write this out as Watashi wa yoku anime o mimasu. One of the verbs that we talked about earlier. Mimasu means to watch. And if you also note, I didn't end the sentence with this. Similar to des, when we end with this mimasu sound, when we have that kind of, we can end sentences with just verbs like that. We do not need to add the des to the end of that. In the case of those other sentences, like watashi wa erioto desu, we add that because there isn't a verb, I believe, in formal writing, that des sort of serves as like what we have there, because otherwise it wouldn't have anything really ending that sentence. But now these verbs, that ending serves as an appropriate ending to our sentence. So here, this says, Watashi wa yoku anime o mimasu. And that this, even though it is the hiragana for wo, similar to how the hiragana for ha is read and pronounced as wa, when we're talking about doing an action, wo is pronounced as o. So, watashi wa yoku anime o mimasu. I often watch anime. And here, this is the first case of that word order not exactly aligning with how the sentence is structured. You can see, I often watch anime. Anime is the last word in the sentence. But here, anime is in the middle of the sentence. Watch is in the middle of the sentence in English. But it's the last word that we use in the Japanese sentence, mimasu. So this is now, like, compared to the previous sentences, it was pretty close to English word order. We kind of just said I am blank for a lot of those examples, and watashi wa blank lines up with that. But now, you can see that word order is a little bit different. I'm not going to get too down into the nitty-gritty of that. That's going to be for next week. I'm just going to talk about some basic sentences with the same consistent structure, just so we can see how the conjugation works here. Let's see here. So this is an example of a habitual action. We can also use this for future actions or plans. In that case, we could say something like, I will not go to Tokyo. That should be capital T. This year. So I will not go this year. We would say, Watashi wa otoshi and Tokyo. That's the kanji for Tokyo. Somewhat important to know. You know, it's the capital, so you should know that this symbol here refers to Tokyo. Ni imasen. So writing that out with English, with Romaji, it would be Watashi wa otoshi Tokyo ni ikimasen. So you can see here's an example of where we use the negative. Watashi wa kotoshi Tokyo ni ikimasen. And again, this year is at the end. You could also say, I mean, technically you could also say that this translates to this year I will not go to Tokyo, but still it's important to note that that word order isn't the same. In Japanese, we say watashi wa, and in this case we're talking about going to a place, Tokyo. We put that time right before, because we're talking about Tokyo this year. So Tokyo this year was at the end of the sentence in English, but in Japanese, came right after stating you, I, watashi. And then go is in the middle of the sentence for the English sentence, but it's the last term at the end of the Japanese one. Verbs are typically used as sentence enders, much unlike English where we have the verb in the middle of the sentence here. I will not go to Tokyo this year, as opposed to watashi wa kotoshi Tokyo ni ikimasen. Or in the previous sentence, I often watch anime. Watashi wa yoku anime o mimasu. So, the verb in Japanese is what we usually have at the end of the sentence, while preceded by a particle here. So far, we've only really talked about wa, ga, and mo, and these all are just state of being. We say watashi wa to say that you are. If you're in agreement with someone else being something, like you're both students, you would say watashi mo gakusei, saying you're both students. And then ga is used for questioning. But these are the only particles that we've talked about so far. What I'm going to talk about next is going to be a bit, but I think as long as I give the proper context, I think we should be fine seeing how these work, because they all work very similarly. These particles that I'm going to go over are all related to, or almost all of them, are related to an action. One of them isn't. So let's go over these and talk about the context here. This is going to be quite a section, and probably going to be the last thing I talk about because I'll be talking about this for quite a while. So particles. And we'll call this part 2. And let's keep that as its own layer. This first one we're going to talk about is wo. And this is used with verbs. When the noun is the direct object. It's when we're directly working with the noun. For example, I write out keiki o taberu taberu, or not taberu, sorry, because we're doing the present positive would be tabemasu, or I eat cake. And again, you can see here, cake is the last thing we say in English, but in Japanese, it came first. Keiki o tabemasu. While eat, which is in the middle of the sentence, is a sentence ender in Japanese. Same case here. I'm going to use the case of what I talked about earlier. Anime o mimasu. Just to relate that back to the previous sentence. I watch anime. And again, the same thing applies here. Watch. And just to write this out for anyone seeing this later, just to be sure about the pronunciation, this would be Eki o tabe mas. And this would be anime o mimasu. And that's how we would set this up. So that's the basic rundown of o. It's used for verbs. You're talking directly about a noun, you're talking directly about an object. So cake, you're eating the cake, you're watching anime. That is the case where we would use o. And I'm actually going to use this case here. I'm going to build on that sentence in the next case, or in the next particle, which is going to be de. So de is used to describe where an event occurs. So this would be, for example, if I say, like the previous sentence, I said I watch anime. Where do I watch anime? You could say Gakko. That's school. Gakko de anime. That looks like a really weird ni. Gakko de anime o mimasu. And that's I watch anime at school. And I mean, you could probably say it in different ways too. You could probably say, like, at school I watch anime, or I think that would be the only other, like, reasonable translation for it. But both ways would be correct. And again, just to note that word order here, we started with gakko. That's the last word we had in English. Anime, they're both in the middle actually. And then mimasu. Mimasu, to watch, is the last word here, but again, is the second word in the English sentence. So this is a pretty big departure from how we speak in English. We don't end our sentences in verbs. We usually have them near the start of the sentence. But here, consistently, we're ending our sentences with verbs and what kind of way we're affecting the verbs. So that is de, and we use that to sort of describe location along with whatever action we're talking about. You can still see that we used o here. So this doesn't actually have to do with the verb, but rather a location. The next one that we're going to talk about is ni. So now, this one apparently has a lot of different meanings, but from what I studied, there's two big common meanings that goes with it. Actually, wait. I think what I'm gonna do... Yeah, this is fine. So ni, two big topics that it follows along with is movement. So if you're going somewhere, if you noticed in the previous examples when I was talking about verb usage, that sentence I used was Watashi wa kotoshi Tokyo ni ikimasen. Ni is what we use to describe movement. When there's motion involved, when you're traveling somewhere, that's the particle that we use. So you could say watashi wa gakko ni ikimasu. Or I will go to school. You can see here, go is our verb, and that's our sentence ender. Watashi wa gakko ni ikimasu. We can also use it to represent time. So we could say ichiji this chichiji ni okimasu. If I write this out here, this reads as I will wake up at 7. And you can see that this also serves as another example of that future tense, that you're describing future actions. You're going to sleep at night, and you're saying, I will wake up at 7. This is ichiji ni okimasu. Wake up at 7. But 7 is what comes first here. Okimasu. You can see that that's where they are placed. Let me actually mark this differently. Okimasu. Wake up. And the last one that we're going to talk about is actually really similar to ni, but it's used exclusively for only moving. We can't use this one for time. What I'm going to do here, actually, let's duplicate this layer. You see Control J, Control E. Why can't I duplicate this? There we go. And now let's clear out some of this. Let's delete this. And the last particle that we talk about, is A. Pronounced A. So here, instead of saying watashi wa gakko ni ikimasu, we could say watashi wa gakko e ikimasu. It means the same thing. They're both used for movement. They're both talking about going from place to place. Okay. And let's just erase this here. And that's it. Let me just see if I have another example sentence here prepared. Yeah, no, that's the same one. Watashi wa gakko e ikimasu. I will go to school. And those are just a few new particles. we talked about verbs, and we talked now about how we apply those verbs into the sentences. We have a couple of different particles to use with that. We have e, we have ni, de, and we have o. So o is going to be used for objects that we are using, objects that involve directly with our actions. I could say keiki o tabemasu to say I'm eating the cake. I would say anime o mimasu to say I am watching anime. And you can see that this is a different situation compared to the previous particles that we've worked with. All the particles that we worked with, like wa, ga, mo, and no, they all were about noun interaction. They were talking about two nouns compared to each other. Here, we're now connecting a noun to a verb, connecting a noun to an action. And that requires us to use these new particles. O being used for nouns, for verbs in general. Then we have de for describing location. And this is actually connecting, again, two nouns together. Gakko de anime. You're watching anime at the school. Ni, we use with verbs that have to do with either movement or have to do with actions related to time. Watashi wa gakko ni ikimasu. I will go to school. Shichiji ni okimasu. I will wake up at 7. So unlike o, which is used for interacting with nouns and verbs, this is used specifically for these cases here, about movement and with time. And lastly, e, very similar to ni, has to do with exclusively movement. So when you're traveling from place to place, you'll usually use e or ni to represent that. And one last thing about all these particles, because this is kind of a big thing to consider. My book doesn't explain it too much, but it assures us the following. Particles I can't spell. Particles in general end up getting dropped in spoken language. Think about it like how in English, how we have academia, how we have academic writing, but when we speak colloquially, there's a lot of things that we drop, a lot of words that we say that we wouldn't write in an actual formal paper, and I'm going to work under the understanding that being able to understand the different particles is important, like beginning, when you're reading new material and just trying to understand the language, that it helps build the context of what you're talking about, especially when you're like trying to read like stories at a lower level. That's probably going to help to understand. And even like regularly when I'm on like Twitter or other social media, I can discern a lot of context just from knowing like what the particles are, knowing that if I see o or if I see wa, that it sort of defines the context of what's happening. Let me take a drink. And in general, the more you learn, the more you end up learning that you don't know, but also the more that you're able to understand still. Even with what I know so far, I have a pretty good time like deciphering and translating things, and that when I end up clicking that hit translate button, I'm usually pretty close on the mark. And that has to do with just a lot of studying kanji, a lot of studying vocab, a lot of studying and knowing things about particles. And I think as long as you keep on grinding at that, as long as you keep on working hard towards that, you'll start to see improvements little by little. I'm definitely a lot better at reading it now than I was 1 or 2 years ago, and I have been slacking quite a bit, but I still find myself able to read better than I was before, which is really encouraging. And I think as long as you keep at it, as long as you are more diligent than I was, I think you'd probably see progress just as fast, if not faster. I want to talk now about one last thing. And this is sort of a more casual thing, I guess, in terms of like, it's not like formal grammar stuff, but rather this is sort of just like a conversational kind of question, and that's this. We talked about how when we end a verb with mas, that means it's the present positive. When we talked about masen, we talked about how that is the present negative. But there is another case here. Masen ka. As you guys know, or maybe know, if you're new here, if you're not new here, whenever you end a sentence in ka, that's a question. That means that you're questioning something, you're asking a question to someone. And when we do that with the present negative with a verb, it's seen as a sort of invitation to do something. So, when attaching the present negative and question particle, or I could actually rewrite this. This is kind of a little awkwardly worded. When attaching the question particle, I would say to a present negative it serves as an invitation. For example, you could say looks like this. Ban gohan. Ban gohan o abe masen. This sentence reads as Ban gohan o tabemasen ka? Which is, do you what? Want to eat dinner with me? So, literally what it's saying here, masen ka, it's sort of like saying, don't you want to eat dinner with me? Would you like to? Because not eat and then question. It's like, don't you want to eat dinner with me? Or do you not want to eat dinner with me? Sort of like asking you, questioning if you wouldn't want to do it. It's sort of like being polite, you know? Instead of like asking if someone would want to do something with you, asking them if they wouldn't want to do something with you is how this seems to be framed. Let me write out the translation here. Ban gohan o abe masen ka. And you could respond in one of two ways. You could say, ii desu ne, which is like, sounds good to me. Or you could respond like, and then ちょっと. And what this is, you know what ちょっと means? It means a little bit. This is, it's a little. And in general, when you can't do something, or like when something's like out of the way for you, it's inconvenient, you just say ちょっと. It's a little inconvenient. And that is how you would A, give an invitation, and B, respond to it, or possible responses to it. And that's all I have for today. Thank you everyone who showed up. Thank you for tuning in. If you're tuning in from the future, I hope you were able to learn something. I hope what I explained made a little bit of sense. I know especially if you're a first-time viewer, it might be a little daunting. Dekimashita. Okay, that's good to hear. So yeah. Next week we'll continue with this lesson. We're gonna finish up. There's just a couple more things in this chapter that I have to go over. And we'll probably do some more comprehensive practice here, go over some more verb conjugation just to give everyone some time to let this settle in. And that's it. Hopefully you guys are learning. I hope I didn't go too fast or anything. And I hope you guys all have a wonderful night. Class is dismissed.